Shalom. It's Rabbi Dan here with Shalom Pipe Channel, and I have a message I'd like to share with you, a message that you may have heard many times before, but put in the context of a healing story. But I wanted to share it with a little bit of a Hebraic flavor to it, and with the perspective of it being representative of the story of salvation. So in Mark chapter 5, and I'm going to read out of the New Living Translation, Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. Now, a leader of the synagogue basically has two main purposes, besides helping run the synagogue itself. But how it relates to this story, the two purposes that he would have authority over would be interpreting the law and enforcing the law. And so you have a leader of the local synagogue, Jairus, who is, as you're going to see here in a minute, is coming before Jesus. He's searching out Jesus because he has an urgent message that's on his heart. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He is literally, if you read Matthew, it says that he fell before him. He is at the feet of Jesus, in front of Jesus. And he says, and it says, pleading fervently with him. It says, my little daughter is dying. One of the other Gospels, we see that she is also 12 years old. He says, my 12-year-old daughter is dying. Please come and lay your hands on her. Heal her so she can live. Jesus decided to go with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. Now picture a Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving shopping day, and this big mob, this big crowd. And it says a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. Is it a little weird and peculiar that she had been bleeding for 12 years, and the young man, the leader of the local synagogue, his daughter was 12 years old? I thought that was interesting. But this nameless woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors over the years. She had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. Now notice where she's at. It says she came up behind him. So Jairus is in front of Jesus, kneeling, saying, please come and heal my daughter. She's dying. Jesus says, okay, let's go. So they start to go, and then this woman comes up behind him. And she says, and it says in verse 28, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, the other Gospels actually say the fringe of his garment, I will be healed. And so this is where we're at right now. She is attempting to reach out to touch his robe. If you read in Leviticus 15, which is part of the Torah, it's where the laws are actually given. It talks about in verse 25 of chapter 15, if a woman has a flow of blood for many days that is unrelated to her menstrual period, or if the blood continues beyond her normal period, she is considered unclean. As during her menstrual period, the woman will be unclean as long as the discharge continues. Any bed she lies on, any object she sits on during that time will be unclean, as just during her normal menstrual period. If any of you touch these things, you will be unclean. You must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean till evening. When the woman's bleeding stops, she must count off 7 days, then she will be clean. On the 8th day she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and present them to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will offer one for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering. Through this process, the priest will purify her before the Lord for the impurity caused by her bleeding. This is how you will guard the people of Israel from ceremonial uncleanliness. So you have this picture that she's considered unclean because of this bleeding situation she has, and she's outside the city because she can't touch anybody. She can't be around anybody. And now you have her in the middle of this mob, this crowd, and they are pressing in on him, and she's worked her way up to be able to touch the fringe of his garment. Now, why is that important, and why would she get this idea? In Matthew, it even says, because it said that she thought that if I would just touch the fringe of his garment, I would be healed. Where would you get that idea? That would be like saying, if I could just touch his shirt cufflink or something. It why would you say the French? Where would she get this idea? Well, because she would be Jewish and she's approaching Jesus and whatnot. She would have heard when she went to synagogue and temple, she would have heard this verse. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. This is from the book of Malachi, chapter 4, verse 2. Son of Righteousness is actually a reference to the Messiah. And when it says will rise with healing in his wings, the word wings there is kanaf. And kanaf refers to the fringed feathers on a bird's wings. So when she sees that this is the Messiah, and I remember hearing in synagogue that there would be healing in his fringed feathers, and I never understood that until here, this Rabbi Yeshua, the Messiah, the Mashiach, he's come, and he must have healing in his wings, healing in his tzitzit, in his tassels, in his kanaf. So I must grab that, because that is where the healing is. So we pick up the story there, and it says, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe or his fringe, I will be healed. And immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my fringe, my robe? His disciples said to him, look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me? But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him, told him what she had done. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. While he was still speaking to her, this is verse 35 of Mark chapter 5, the messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the rabbi now. But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just have faith. I want you to stop right there. You have a man, ruler of the synagogue, who can enforce the law. The law states that she is not even supposed to be around people, let alone in this crowd, this mad mob crowd that is around this Messiah, this rabbi. This is my only hope of saving my 12-year-old daughter who's dying. And now this woman, because she has held up the Messiah, because she has held him up, my daughter has just died. You have a man here representing the law and the punishment that is supposed to be dished out by the law. If you would break the law, you would be stoned. So all he'd have to say is, Jesus, please step out of the way. I must enforce the law, and I must have her stoned. I'm going to enforce the law and have her stoned. She has just caused my daughter to die. She has delayed the healing to where my daughter is now dead. But that's where Jesus stands between us. You'll notice the woman is never named, but Jairus is. The leader of the synagogue is named. We, as believers, are known as the bride of Christ. I believe we represent that woman. We have an issue of blood. We need Jesus' blood. We need Yeshua's blood to cover us. And I believe, because she's unnamed, that if Jesus was to step out of the way, if Yeshua was to step out of the way, we would see that the law would condemn us and we should be put to death. But Yeshua doesn't step out of the way. He stands in between us and our punishment, and he says, I will pay the price. And he does on Calvary. So that is the story of salvation. It is a healing story, and it's a beautiful healing story, but it is also, in my opinion, the Hebraic way of looking at this. If I was to read this to a Jewish crowd, they would say, wait a minute, she's not supposed to be there. She should have been stoned. And the fact that she's holding up the leader of the synagogue from getting his daughter healed, holy cow, are you serious? But then Jesus stopped the crowd, verse 37, wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion, weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead, she's only asleep. The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, Talitha koum, which means, little girl, get up. And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened. Then he told them to give her something to eat. So we do have the healing story, and it is beautiful. And I do believe that there is something about the fact that she is 12 years old, and the woman had the issue of blood for 12 years. But here's the thing. There was a father. His daughter was about to die. His only hope was Jesus, the rabbi. There was a woman who was being scorned, shunned, and rejected by her people because of issues and health concerns and conditions that she had. Jesus took care of both. He answered the law and dealt with it. He answered the woman and dealt with her. And he answered the father and he dealt with the daughter. This is what Yeshua does. He takes care of all of us. So until next time, I hope this message was a blessing to you. And shalom in Yeshua. Good night.